Welcome to Good News from St. Andrew's, Guelph. It is our pleasure to be able to bring this episode to you each and every week on Rogers TV 20. I'm the Reverend John Borthwick, and I'll be your host for today's episode. As you can see, I'm certainly rocking the COVID hair, and haven't shaved much either. It's just where we're at in this journey that we're on together in this pandemic time. I hope you're keeping safe. I hope you're doing well, and I hope you're taking care of yourself in all the different ways you can. Part of the good news we want to bring today is to remind you that you are not alone. You are not alone in what you're experiencing or what you're feeling. You're not alone in how this pandemic has impacted you. There are so many across this world of ours who are experiencing just very similar kinds of feelings as we journey through this winter here in North America, and as we journey through this continuing ongoing struggle with this pandemic. There are signs of hope. There are glimmers of hope in our midst. I'm hearing stories of folks in our community, and I believe in the community in general, who are receiving the vaccine. A lot of our seniors, vulnerable folks who are living in seniors' residences across our province and across the country and across the world. Many of our first responders and the staff who work in many of those long-term care facilities. It is a wonderful, wonderful, hopeful thing to see when we hear those stories. So let's remind ourselves of those stories as we continue to journey. And the ways in which people are reaching out beyond themselves continues to inspire me. The ways in which people are caring for other people in maybe a way they never did before. It reminds me that I'm not alone, and I hope it reminds you too, that we are in this together, as they say. And so I will offer that good news to you today as we continue this journey. Now, over the past few weeks, as we've introduced these episodes, we've offered a few thoughts around some questions. We talked about what is worship. We've tried to think a little bit, even in the scope of this 10 minutes of 15 minutes we have, around what or who is God or the divine. And last week we talked a little bit about who is this Jesus we keep talking about. Jesus is a big theme within the Christian tradition. And so we tried to unpack that just a little bit about who this Jesus is and why we might want to follow his example. And so today I just wanted to build on that just a little more today. And again, it's extremely limited. I'd love to have further and longer conversations with you. And again, if you want to connect with us, we'd love to hear from you. At standrewsguelph.com is our website, and you can email me or connect with us that way through that venue. So what I want to talk about today is what is really so amazing about this Jesus, and what is his way that we're talking about. Now, I think in the last episode I talked a little bit about this Messiah piece, this idea that for years and years and years, the people of Israel, the people of our ancestry in the faith, had this, through their prophets, through the stories they told, they talked about a time when God would change the world, and essentially that all people on earth would come to worship God, come to pledge allegiance in a way, for a turn of phrase, to this God. And part of that journey towards God reigning on earth, or God's kingdom, God's reign coming to be a part of the earth, is really about this idea of a Messiah would come, a chosen one, someone who would begin to clear the way for this new kind of way of seeing the world, of being in this world. And it really comes from two sort of foundational pieces. One foundational piece is the story that the people of Israel told themselves around the creation. So the idea that there was this time when God, the one who created all things, lived in sort of harmony, lived in community with human beings. And then something happened that broke that relationship. And so there was always this hope in the Bible and the stories that are told in the Hebrew scriptures, and certainly as a part of the themes of the New Testament, that somehow this relationship would be restored by someone or by something. And so this Messiah was the thing that the prophets kept speaking about, this idea that something would come, a a son of God would come, a son in the line of the great kings of Israel would come and would set the pathway forward for this relationship to be returned to wholeness, really, a completeness. And so they had a couple of different visions of what this Messiah might look like. One of the really dominant visions in the Hebrew scriptures of what this Messiah might look like was this idea that there might be this great warrior, this new human king that would come and would conquer the world around them and would lift up the people of Israel, God's people, into this powerful position. And they believed that this was whom they were waiting for, that they would be once again on top in the world, that they would be in charge, that their God and their way of seeing the world and God's rule would be put in place once and for all, and all other nations would have to sort of be under this domination in a way. Now, they softened it, I might say, by saying that this domination that they spoke of, where they were very oppressed by other empires, by the violence of those empires, the idea was that when this new God's kingdom came, when this new reign of God came across the earth, that it would usher this almost universal harmony, this peace that would come across all people. The language that's sometimes used figuratively is that the lion would lie with the lamb, and there would be no more war or no more violence, and there would be this peace and harmony in the world. That was really what they were looking for. And so one way they believed that would be ushered in would be by this warrior, this powerful new king that would come, that would be God's chosen one, the Messiah. But there's an interesting other thread in the Hebrew scriptures that talks about a similar kind of thing, this Messiah that would come, the one that would come and would change the way we see the world. But in this case, this Messiah is one who suffers. And the language that's used is suffering servant, someone who would come to serve humanity, who would come not to dominate or cause destruction and use their power to overwhelm or overcome all the empires of the world, but through their willingness to suffer, their willingness to not use their power for violent means, but use it for peaceful means, that somehow that would transform the world as we saw it. And the prophets spoke of such a Messiah as that, this suffering servant one. And so when Jesus comes, some believe him to be this Messiah. Some are hoping that he might use this sort of warrior power. He had a great following, and the belief was that maybe he would call for his people to overthrow the Roman Empire, which they were currently suffering under. It seemed that he wasn't going to do that kind of thing. But what they did notice, some noticed as a part of his ministry and of who he was, but others noticed it much further after, that he seemed to be connecting with this suffering servant kind of way. Because he will actually suffer and die. And so much of his life was given in the service, in the care, in the love for other human beings. And he called his disciples to love one another, to love your neighbor as yourself, to pray for your enemies, to take care of those who are in need in this community we live in. And so he was this different kind of Messiah that they were speaking of. But what makes this Jesus so amazing? Well, a lot of the stories in the Bible, and for many people this becomes a barrier for them, are what we might call miraculous stories. Certainly Jesus was a great teacher. He taught amazing things. He told stories. He transformed the way people could look at their own lives and the lives of other people. He made it so that we could see a new way to live in our current existence. Also promised something even better, something maybe different, something even more fuller as a part of a future life. But a lot of what Jesus talked about was in the here and now, how we can transform and live under what he called the kingdom of God and see it right here and now. Yes, there's other people in control, governments, powerful authorities over us, but Jesus talked about a kingdom being inaugurated, was the word that was often used, by the time when he turned up. And this kingdom would give us these lenses, this way of seeing the world. But Jesus also did some amazing things while he was on earth. There are stories of feeding miracles, meaning he's teaching and talking to people, thousands of people, it says, and they don't have enough to eat. And somehow he's able to transform, the story goes, a poor boy's lunch into enough to feed thousands of people and even have some leftovers. Jesus heals people, people who've been suffering with diseases and struggling with leprosy or illnesses and lameness and not able to walk and not able to see or not able to hear. And Jesus is able to heal these people. And then he does some pretty amazing things by raising people who were thought to be dead to life. And then, of course, himself, the story goes that he dies on the cross. And then he comes to life again through his resurrection. Now, these are pretty amazing things. And where I want to go with this, just for in this short time we have together, is just to talk about what I like to think of as, from the improv community, of a yes and. So sometimes when you're talking to Christians, you might hear them say, you must believe in this in a literal way. You must understand this, and you must accept that this happened. I like to sit with more of a yes and. So someone might say to me, maybe you're saying it yourself. Someone might say, well, Reverend, do you believe that Jesus fed thousands of people? That he transformed a little boy's lunch into enough for thousands? Do you believe that Jesus healed a leper, a blind man, and gave him sight? Do you believe that he raised people from the dead? And I want to say to all those questions, yes. Yes, I do. I believe that Jesus had the power, the ability to do just that. But I also want to say yes and. The yes and is, and I also believe that there are ways of interpreting those stories, of reminding ourselves that they are a story. Do I believe they literally happened? Yes. But I'm also able to hold, and they're a story that has the power to transform or to teach or to help us to see the world in a very different way. So maybe you've heard over the years these stories told, or people who are trying to explain these stories in certain ways. I'll just give you a couple of examples. Some people have said, well, that poor boy's lunch was really about the little boy demonstrated to a whole community of people who had something. They had lunch, they had food, they had even food to share. His sacrifice, his willingness to come to Jesus, the teacher, and say, I have this, I could share my lunch with other people, was an example to the rest of the community of, we need to be sharing our food. And that was really the miracle. That's a great way of understanding that story. I've heard people have said that in the time of Jesus, sometimes people were assumed dead who were not. And so when Jesus turned up and said, little girl, stand up, and she does, people thought, wow, he's raised someone from the dead. Or in his own timing, did he bring someone to life who was still alive, but just the community didn't know? I don't know. And that's another big theme of all these stories. I don't know. I wasn't there. But hear me say, I believe Jesus could do it. And I also believe in the power of the story being transformative. And so when we talk about some of these things around Jesus being amazing because he can do these things, I really, really hope that these won't become a barrier for you as you begin to hear the stories of Jesus. I don't want it to be a barrier for you to continue to learn and continue to hear and be impacted by the story of Jesus. That, like, I don't believe he healed people. I don't believe he raised people from the dead. I'm not sure I believe in any of that stuff. I'm saying to you, you can hold it a little lighter. You can maybe you'll get to a point where you'll say, I believe Jesus could do it, but you also might not get there. Maybe all you can get there is you've seen healing happen. You've seen this world around us and the ability to take scarcity and make it into something abundant that could feed people. And you have seen the raising of the dead happen in the sense that you've seen situations, maybe in your own life, where everything seemed over. There wasn't anything that was going to happen differently. You had no hope. And then something happened. And all of a sudden, new life was born. It was like the situation was raised from the dead. And that's what's amazing about following Jesus. Seeing the world through Jesus' eyes. Doing the things that Jesus does. And trying to be more like Jesus every day. Well, we think that's good news. And so for today, it's our service from January 31st, 2021. And we're talking about the Gospel of Mark, chapter 1, verses 21 to 28. It's a story where Jesus does something amazing, and people are amazed. I'm glad you're joining us for good news from St. Andrew's, Guelph.